online magazine. And it's Wednesday, May 10th, 2023. And I am doing an interview with Mr. Dale Kaczmarek uh, of the Chicago's Ghost Research Society, who I got to meet briefly one night down here in Cloverdale, Alabama, which is about 35 miles from where I live here in Waynesboro, Tennessee. While he and an associate of his from Chicago were down there with Wyatt Cox and Dan Erickson and some other people trying to film some anomalous light phenomena. So anyway, it's great to actually be able now to sit down and converse with you about your studies and all. So Dale, welcome to Alternate Perceptions.
Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it, and I haven't really had time to listen to some of the EVPs, but I know I've seen some photographs that you sent that your investigative team have captured over the years of ghost-like images and also anomalous light phenomena. Some may call them spook lights or earth lights. And I know you've done a considerable amount of research, written a book on that subject. And uh, Dr. Greg Little down here in Tennessee told me that he found your research quite interesting. And Peter Jordan over in New Jersey, I've been in touch with him quite a bit. And he says you're one of the top people in the field. So it's good to talk with you.
Well, I appreciate that. Don't make me blush too much here.
Oh, we'll try not to, but apparently there's some obviously some proper recognition due here to you, and also I noticed when you were down there, you were quite well prepared and very focused on trying to capture some sort of anomalous light phenomena. You had all this instrumentation that you were using, and I had mentioned beforehand that if you wanted to, we might look at some of what you use in your work to capture images of whatever happens to be present at the time, whether it be a ghost light or a ectoplasmic formation or a ghost, apparition of some sort.
Yeah, I mean, I was down there for several days, as you know, with staying at the cabin, which Wyatt Cox very very kindly got for us for those days, which was excellent because we were right in the area where those phenomena were occurring. Some said that you could see them through the field next to the cabin there, and others we went a little bit further away in some neighbor's yard and looked across this open field here to try to find this phenomena. Now, I've been researching ghost lights for the better portion of 30 years now. And at that time, I wrote a book called Illuminating the Darkness, the Mystery of Spook Lights, which I traveled all across the country, looking for spook lights. Sometimes I was able to debunk them. Some that were simply just, there were no explanations for them. I could not come up with a rational explanation, so they're still kind of unknown. And one of those is the Joplin, Missouri spook light.
Oh, yeah.
And I've been down there for, I probably 7 or 8 times now. And when I was first down there in Labor Day weekend of 1982, it was that was one of the first times we actually saw that light down there. And it was really an amazing thing. I got some very, very good pictures. In fact, I was able to talk to some local reporters from the Joplin Globe, Martha Churchwell, and she had shared some photographs that she had taken out there, for a story she was doing. These were black and white images, and they were simply amazing. I had a chance to talk to people when I was down there. People shared their encounters with me, and I was able to make very close observations of the spook light. I mean, within a matter of 50 feet away from me, which was pretty amazing. These are not car headlights. These are not car taillights. They're not swamp gas, will-o'-the-wisp, foxfire, ball lightning, gases from subterranean mines, temperature inversion layers, reflections of far away lights. I mean, I've been through the entire gamut. When I investigate spook lights, or for that matter, anything, even ghosts, I always try to do a bit of reverse psychology. In other words, I try to determine what it isn't. Sometimes that's easier to try to figure out what it is. So I try to rule out these explanations along the way. And, obviously, in the case of the Joplin light, there is no swamps. There are no subterranean mines. The nearest highway, which actually goes, like, if you're looking at it this way, it would go in this direction, is actually below the horizon. So there's no way you'd be able to see car headlights on that interstate when it's actually below what you're looking at. They would have to be reflected up in some manner, inconsistent with meteorological conditions, which would be like a temperature inversion layer that would cause those lights to somehow be reflected up there. And that's a very rare phenomenon. And for that to happen nearly every night from dusk till dawn, no, it just doesn't happen. So when I had a chance to come out here to investigate this Cloverdale light, Wyatt Cox had wrote a very nice book on it, the amazing Alabama Clover. Amazing Spook? I forget what it's called now, but it's the amazing Cloverdale, Alabama spooklight mystery. There you go. It's a mouthful. And he had wanted the book published, which I did graciously through the Ghost Research Society Press. I have 19 different titles that I have produced through that publishing company. And it was just amazing, not only that he devoted an entire book just to one phenomenon, just one light, but he had a lot of interesting photographs in there that look like balls of light, that look like what you would call rods, which would be like a light traveling from right to left or left to right. And when you snap the picture, obviously you're not able to freeze that image, so you see a little bit of which way it was traveling. So I saw a lot of those inside her. So I was really kind of psyched up to come out there and not only investigate with you all, but Dr. Erickson, who was, I believe, is the physicist that came out there, and a number of other people that had close-hand encounters, that had seen the light, that had photographed the light in the past. So I was hoping to get out there with some of my equipment and to do some studies out there. Hopefully the light would be fairly close enough where I'd be able to measure it. So I used things like Geiger counters. I had a Geiger counter out there to see if there was any radiation or radioactive material, anything like that. It just did not get close enough. In fact, I never even saw the light the whole time I was down there, which was a bit disappointing, but I'm kind of used to that. I mean, not every place you go, you're going to see something or come across with something, but I do believe that I might have seen two lights, very, very brief, when I was over at the neighbor's, I don't remember the neighbor's name, but we were over in his driveway, which we had permission to be there. We were looking across his field. And I briefly saw what looked like a red light that was kind of like at the tree line, and it looked like it was about ground level. And when I saw it, I just quickly saw it. I didn't even have a chance to snap a picture. It was just there and gone so quickly. And I think I called Wyatt's attention to that. And there was another older gentleman that was out there, and he was from a neighboring area. And I think we just talked our heads off for the whole time we were there. And I kind of said, well, there are no roads back there. And he said, that's correct. So it couldn't have been a car tail light the way I had just seen. And if it was a tail light, you think you would have seen it for a little bit longer than just a little flash. So I saw that, and I go, well, I didn't have a chance to get my camera up. I had everything set up just in case something showed up. And then a little bit further to the left, as you're looking across the field, I saw what looked like a blue flash of light. Which was this was pretty much higher off the ground. I would say it's hard to kind of estimate the elevation, but I would say at least maybe 8-10 feet off the ground, and it was over near another house. But there were no lights except I think there was a security light that was on. Nobody had just pulled into the driveway or anything like that, and it just kind of flashed very quickly, and it was gone. And so I did have other equipment there. I used What I could show you right here, I kind of use what's called a full spectrum camera. And basically the full spectrum camera, see if I can get this thing to turn on here. It's going to be kind of dark because the full spectrum camera has to have a lot of light. And that's one of my problems out there. But basically what it does is it picks up the entire spectrum of light. So I figured if I could use that maybe in conjunction with a, I think they call it a spectrum gradient. I should be able to break that light into the various spectrum and then be able to analyze it that way, perhaps tell what it's composed of, what frequency or what that light was operating on. But again, it just wasn't there long enough to do that. I was very amazed by Dr. Erickson. He had a very interesting night scope that he had out there. One evening when we were at the looking at the field from where the cabin was located. And I mean, this thing, this was a generation 3, maybe a generation 3 plus, and it had a device that you could hook your camera mounted on the back of this this device. And when he turned it on, I mean, literally, I don't know how far the tree line was from it, but I'm going to say a couple of 100 yards away, and it was like broad daylight. I mean, you could, if there was somebody walking across that field at 300 yards, you would have seen them. And it was just amazing because it was so bright. If there was any lights that showed up or anything, you'd be able to really get a nice video of that. But again, nothing showed up. And I just to kind of joke around here a little bit, I mean, I almost tried to buy that device off of him. He almost sold it to me. I mean, he almost sold it to me. And then he goes, well, maybe I'll hold on to it still for a while, because I think he spent about $4,000 for that thing. I mean, it's I had a Russian-made binoculars. They were Generation 1 night scope, and they basically cost me $600. And this device actually amplifies ambient light 36,000 times. So, I mean, once you turn them on, I could see the tree line, but not as well as Dr. Erickson's, though. But I could see the tree line, and I could watch through there, and I could see if there was anything, happening. Of course, nothing happened. So, besides that, I did have, I had other EMF devices, EMF meters that I used. One of them I have here, which is called the Tri-Field Natural EM meter. I kind of call it the Cadillac of EMF meters, because this meter will pick up electrical, electromagnetic, magnetic, microwave, and radio waves on this device. And this device here, you don't get false readings like a lot of the other, I want to call them cheaper EMF devices like K2s and cell sensors and things of that nature, because they pick up so much, you don't know if you're getting a false reading. Now, this, you can take it indoors, and it won't even pick up anything as far as AC fields. So it won't pick up, like light switches, electrical outlets, fuse boxes, or anything like that. You can put it right up next to it, and it won't do anything. However, you put a K2 next to that, thing's going to whine like crazy. So it's just the way that this thing is devised. It doesn't give a lot of false readings. So I use that quite extensively. And again, I wasn't close enough to probably get a reading with this, but I used that evening. I also used another device called a Mel meter. And the Mel meter is basically, they do the same thing. They have a temperature, and also, if I could turn it on here real quick, I'd show you what I'm talking about. But basically, you can see that now it has the big number there is your EMF. Right now it's 0.0, and below that's your temperature. Now the thing about this has a telescopic probe that you can pull out, and basically you can turn it on here in the back. And then what happens is, if it's producing a field of energy around this probe, and if you were to get close to it, you can hear how it's making noise, and the lights are going to go off, and then when you touch it, all the lights go off. So I was using that out there to see if anything might, just because I wasn't seeing it or it was far away, doesn't mean that it was producing sufficient energy to go close to my meters. Yeah, usually these meters are only sensitive to about 18 to 24 inches. But if you come across a very strong electromagnetic pulse or electromagnetic field, then obviously these devices would be able to pick this stuff up. And these are, when you kind of say tri-field, or you say, what these devices basically, they will pick up stuff in an axis around. So it's not just the front. I mean, it'll pick it up on the sides too. It won't pick it up back here. And the same thing with the tri-field, meaning it'll pick up energies here, there, and there. Now, if you were to turn this tri-field onto, say, electric, okay, which is supposed to be picking up electrical energy, but it also picks up biochemical energy. In other words, the energy in our own bodies. So if I just take my hand, you can hear it going off. That's just picking up the energies out of my hand. So again, I tried it in all different settings, and unfortunately I didn't get anything when I was there. I did bring digital recorders, which I do to capture maybe any noise that these earth lights would have maybe emitted. I mean, there have been some cases in my book where people said that in observing spook lights, ghost lights, earth lights, whatever you want to call them, there can be a hissing or a popping sound or even a whine that comes from these things. So obviously you'd want to get that if these lights appeared. And of course, I used some night shot cameras when I was out there. I had a 4K Sony night shot camera, which is it's even better than a 1080p. It's the next step up. And unfortunately, because the ridge line, I will say the ridge line, the tree line was so far away, I wasn't picking up anything. I mean, the screen was pretty dark. Now, I figured if the light would show up, then it should be a light against a black background. You should be able to see the light. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I used when I was out in Joplin, Missouri. I used a very old, full-size VHS camcorder. Now, that's really old school. And I just kind of held it and I zoomed it all the way out as far as I could. And I caught the light. And it's actually on the website that I actually have from 1983. Now, if people that want to view that, they go to my website, ghostresearch.org, and just search for that on there. It's really easy to find. So when I zoomed it all the way out, I mean, I'm trying to hold it as steady as I can, and you kind of see the light doing this, but the light's not actually doing it. It's me trying to hold the camera real steady because you're zoomed out completely. But there is a light that showed up, and rather than simply turning off or turning on like that, it slowly faded out and slowly faded back in, which I thought was very unusual. It's one of the only few lights that I've ever seen behave in such a manner. So I was hoping, but unfortunately it didn't happen. I was hoping to observe the light in Cloverdale a bit more. Now, I'm not ready to write it off by any means, because from what I was told, I think by Wyatt and maybe one other gentleman that was there with me, I don't remember his name, is that the light seems to be a bit more active in the summertime than it was when we were there, because we were there, I believe, in March or something like that. Yeah, and so that was like springtime. So I guess if I was to come back, say in the summer, which probably would be hot as hell down there in Alabama, but I mean, it might be a better opportunity to observe that light. And if White wants to invite me back down, maybe some summer, maybe this summer, next summer, I'm all for it. So to come back and try it again, and maybe I'll have even better equipment next time I come out.
Awesome. Well, I've been out there when it was very, very cold, and during the winter time too. November and December, and I was always under the impression that was a good time to look too,
Oh,
during
okay.
cold weather. But I like the idea of warm nights better. Uh, but yeah, that's the Joplin thing. I had always heard about, people saying it was car lights, so I always kind of wondered about that. So after what you described, it definitely, and it's still an ongoing phenomenon too after all these years.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, unfortunately, the last two times I was out there, I was disappointed. It didn't show up at all. And that was very unusual because when I had been out there in the 1980s and 1990s, I mean, that light was visible pretty much all night long. Now, I mean, it wasn't on all night long, but basically in very long intervals. You might see the light for 3 or 4 minutes at a time, and then it would just fade away, maybe 5 minutes or more, there's nothing, then it would come back again. And the thing about that light, and I think I sent you a couple pictures of that light, but the thing about that light too is that people have actually seen that light split into multiple lights. So it might be one, it was split into two or three, and sometimes shoot off into the woods. I was At that time, it was a gravel road. It's a very rural road. It's not. People park along there. They used to come out there and they used to picnic out there in the middle of the night, bring lounge chairs to watch the light along the side of the road. And as I was walking up to the light, because I left my car back at the observation point. In fact, actually, the light is really seen in Oklahoma because it's on State Line Road right there. And as I'm walking into Oklahoma, the light's getting brighter and brighter and brighter. And so I said, well, I must be getting close to it. So suddenly it just wasn't there anymore. And it was only maybe about a minute before I got up to a big group of people over there. And they said, well, you just missed it. I said, what did I just miss? She said, well, the light was rolling along. It looked like it was rolling along the road about the size of a basketball. And it was kind of like shooting off sparks or something. It was, like giving off some sort of phosphorescent glow. And then suddenly, like the light sensed that people were getting close to it. This is what I thought was kind of interesting, that a lot of people thought that there was some intelligence to this light. The light then kind of rose up off the road and then shot in both directions into the woods and was gone. And I had just missed that by no more than about 45 seconds. And they were very, very, it was great. They said, oh, it was great. It was great. I said, yeah, I always get there just a little bit too late. But when I was there in 1982, I had actually seen the light not on the road, but a little bit off the road on the left-hand side as we were walking up there. Now, back in 82, I didn't have all this equipment. All I had was a 35 millimeter camera. I had a couple of good pair of binoculars, and I had like one very ancient EMF device. So we were out there more or less to observe it. And we had these real powerful binoculars. We put them up to our eyes and we're looking, and it was near a barn. It was so bright, I thought the barn might have been on fire. So it, as I looked through the binoculars, it did not look like a ball of light. It looked like a diamond-shaped object that had a hollow center that you could see trees and bushes through this diamond-shaped object. So then it went down behind the hill, because there's a series of one hill after another along this road. It went down behind this hill, and when it went behind the hill, it left behind kind of a twinkling light effect, like thousands of fireflies, little phosphorescent glows. And I turned to my two colleagues, and I didn't tell them what I saw. I said, what did you guys just see? They told me the exact same thing what I had said. So then we didn't see it for a while. We're waiting for it to return. It didn't return. So we got into the car. We were the only ones on the road that night. This was about 3 o'clock in the morning. So then we started to creep up the hill really slowly with our lights off, because there was nobody. You could see for 2 miles, there was nobody coming down this road. So we got to the really big hill, and suddenly about, I would say 60 feet away, this light kind of emerges over the top of the hill, sits there for a little while. Same thing, kind of a diamond-shaped object. It was kind of fuzzy at that point. Went down behind the hill, left behind that twinkling effect again. And they were waiting for it to reappear. We waited about maybe 10 seconds, 15 seconds. We started to creep up the hill. We got to the top of the hill, and that light, my estimation, was about 1.5 miles down the road. So it had gotten from there, from point A to point B, just like that, and was gone. And I'll tell you, that is one of the creepiest things as far as spooklight activity I have ever seen in my life. And I used to work with professional psychics. And one of the psychics I worked with was very good because she had worked with, with the police and everything. And she told me, I explained to her what we had seen. And she told me, well, in her opinion, that was a portal. That could have been like an interdimensional doorway, if you will. And I've actually given talks on portal hauntings. And I believe Joplin is a portal area. And she says, you might have been in a bit of a danger if you would have got too close. Because what if you would have stepped through that portal and that thing disappeared? You might never come back. And I have actually heard that in a few other spooklight places that I have been to. So I have never seen it like that since. But what I did experience, and I think we talked about this a bit through email, was kind of a zone of fear that I picked up in the Joplin area. Now, I'm a big follower and have always been a big follower of John Keel. I think I have every book that John Keel ever wrote, literally. There must be about 10 of them. Even his autobiography, Jadoo, which is really kind of hard to find. I had a hard copy of that, and when I gave it to John Keel to autograph, he goes, where did you find that? Because this is a very hard book to find. I said, oh, it's an antiquarian bookstore. And it cost me a little bit of money, but so what? And I met him on several occasions, and he talks, I believe, in the Mothman prophecies when he was out there in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, looking into the reports of the Mothman, which was near this old abandoned TNT factory out there. And he said that he was there in broad daylight because he wanted to scope the area out to see what it looked like, because when you go there at night and go there in day, it looks totally different. So he wanted to see what the area looked like. And he was kind of driving along with his car very, very slowly. And then suddenly he was overwhelmed by this anxiety. It was almost like what you call a fight or flight thing. You just want to get out of there. And so he got very, very anxious, and he drove a little bit, just no more than maybe 10 or 15 feet, and suddenly, hey, I'm fine. So then he did that. He retreated back again, and this is all in his book, by the way. Mm-hmm. And he was overcome by this fear. And he looked around and he said, there's no electric wires nearby. There's no high tension wires. There's nothing that would cause me to, because if you get very close to high tension wires, they produce a lot of EMF, and you can have what's called EMF hypersensitivity, which actually which can make you hallucinate, can make your skin crawl. But there was nothing like that anywhere nearby. He said in his book, he came back the next day to the exact same spot, and it was gone. It was not there. And I go, wow, that's pretty cool, because that happened to me. When I was down in Joplin, Missouri, along what they call Spooklight Road, which is actually E50, which is actually really in Oklahoma, as I mentioned, there's a section of the road that has a big dip in it, which I kind of call a holler. And we sat there because it was a good vantage point looking back up towards the hill. And I was there, and I got out of my car. Took my binoculars, getting ready for anything that might have happened. And suddenly I walked into this area, literally, that made my skin crawl. And I was there with other people. So, I mean, I never go anywhere alone. And I've only had this happen to me a few times in places that I've been to, like haunted places as well. Literally, I had such an anxiety attack that I almost said, "Let's go. Let's pack up. Let's get out of here." I was scared. It just hit me, and I've never been like that. I'm never scared of anything that I do. That scared me. I took a few steps back, and I'm fine. I'm fine. It took me a couple seconds, but everything kind of settled down, and I was okay. And I go, well, that's weird. So then I walked a few steps more because I wanted to get that vantage point again, and it hit me again, really bad. And I'm trying to rationalize this. So I'm looking around. I think this is even before I heard about the John Keel thing, because I've had his books, but I've had so many of them. It took me a while to get through them all. And I got Strange Creatures of Time and Space. I got The Eighth Tower. I mean, I got them all. And so I think this is before I read about the John Keel. So that really had no effect on me of what I was doing there, because I had no knowledge of what he had experienced. So again, I'm looking around, trying to figure out, okay, is there something that's causing this? It has to be something I'm walking into. There's got to be something around. Nothing. This is just a very rural road. And I went back there several times since, never experienced that again. We were just there in May of 2022. I went there with my friend, who's my Indiana State coordinator, Chuck Williams, and my a friend that was coming all the way from England to spend a couple of weeks with me. And he wanted to see the spooklights. We took him out there. Unfortunately, it didn't show up, and I was kind of disappointed. But we went right to that area where I'd had that experience. Nothing happened. It was not there. And I said, well, this is the area where we had this. I call it the zone of fear. And I don't know what it is. I was hoping that it would show up again, because this time I had a lot of scientific equipment I could turn on. Back in 1983, I didn't have the equipment we have today. So, I mean, the only thing I probably could have brought in and never really thought about it, which was my first EMF device, an ordinary compass. Because as you know, a compass should point to true north all the time, unless it gets in contact with a strong magnetic field, in which case the compass needle might swing around trying to figure out where the magnetic force is. And if you have a spinning compass in something like that, then you could say, oh, wait, something's wrong here, because something is not only making the compass react funny, but it's also interfering with the geomagnetic fields in this area, because it's causing the compass not to point to north anymore. So this area is like, it would be an anomaly of some kind, and it would be hard to explain. Unfortunately, it was never there again. We never were able to measure it. I've been there several times, kind of hoping I would get anxious again to see if we could, bring in some scientific gear and make some observations. But unfortunately, it wasn't there.
So what year was that happened then?
That was in 1983, I believe. The first time we were there was Labor Day weekend of 1982. And that's when I got a couple of those interesting pictures that I sent you. And the one black and white one is Martha Churchwell's, and the full color one was one that I had taken on a tripod with a 35 millimeter camera. I used a shutter release, and I kept the shutter open for a little bit to bring in more light. I had like 400 speed film. It was on a steady tripod, and I got a very nice glow of this light kind of coming down, and you can see a couple of cars parked on the one side of the road, and they're all kind of looking at the light too as well. The thing I found unusual about that light, and I had actually talked to a man who used to run a spooklight museum over there called Garland Spooky Middleton. Spooky was his middle name. When we were out there observing the light the first 2 years, you kind of had to do this. You kind of had to, you couldn't stand straight and look at it. You kind of had to bend down a little bit, and then you see the light. And I thought that was kind of unusual. Why can't you see it from standing straight up, but when you crouch over a little bit, you can see it? So it maybe has something to do with wavelengths or maybe temperatures, humidity, or something like that that was creating it to be seen only at a certain elevation, which I thought was kind of weird.
Yeah. And what about with the zone of fear experience? You had other people with you. Did they try to duplicate this effect that was having on you, or?
Yeah, there were two people that were there with me initially. I didn't have a very large crew when I went there in 82 and 83. So really all the people I had there was my brother, who was a very keen observer, and I had my mom. It was kind of coming along. And she wasn't that old. She wasn't decrepit or something. So my brother, my mom didn't want to go in there after she just heard what I said. She didn't want to go in. My brother went in there and he had the same experience.
Oh, okay.
So he had the same experience. And I initially, when I have an experience or I capture a piece of evidence, I don't like to put something in somebody's mind by saying, oh, I had this experience, now go and see if you can have the experience. So that's like putting their thoughts in their mind. So I just had this experience and I just kind of walked out and I said, go over there, go closer over there and look up the hill, kind of pointing him to where I had my encounter. And he got over there and he goes, whoa. I go, what's wrong? It feels strange over here. I said, what do you mean? He goes, it's strange. And he kind of backed out and he goes, well, now it's not there anymore. So he had it. And my mom kind of got freaked out a little bit. She went, about that time she got into the car. She was looking at from the car the rest of the night. But yeah, I mean, we had at least two people that had experience there.
Okay, interesting. And so, how many spooklights or earthlight sites have you visited now?
Probably more than 100. In my book, Illuminating the Darkness, the Mystery of Spooklights, I've been out to the Brown Mountain Lights in North Carolina. I've been out to the Mako, North Carolina, what they call Joel Baldwin's Light. I've been out to Chapel Hill, Tennessee, I believe it is, or is it North Carolina? I think it's Tennessee. Chapel Hill, Tennessee. There's a spook light out there.
There is a Chapel Hill spooklight. Yeah, it's along a railroad track. Yeah.
Exactly. I've been out to the Watersmeet, the Ghost Light up Watersmeet, Upper Peninsula, Michigan. There's a couple in Illinois. There's one in Watseka, Illinois, one in Burr Ridge, Illinois. There's also one out, obviously the Joplin Spooklight is the one I've been mostly examining. There's one in Rensselaer, Indiana called the Moody Light. I've seen several examples of lights. When I was out at the Brown Mountain Lights, which again were extensively studied in the 1920s, using whatever they had as far as equipment by them, but they had government that people came out there. And they said that of the lights that they saw, most of the lights they saw could be explained away by trains or cars going up through this hill. But there was, I believe, they said about 8% that they could not explain. They had no explanation for. And even after the area had an extensive flood and people could not go up and down those roads, they were still seeing lights on those roads. Those roads had closed.
And
now, there are some
of those observations were so close that they were truly anomalous, that they were definitely not car headlights.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the lights I really want to get to one year is the Marfa lights down in Texas. Mm-hmm. I have several pictures that people have sent me. There's actually an observation point that you can actually go. There's actually an enclosure that you can go into, and there's a viewing port that you can go out there. I'd like to go out there, but that's all the way in West Texas near El Paso in that area. I've been to, and not only just spooklight locations, but sometimes there are, in my book I write there's 4 criteria that people see spooklights at a lot. Cemeteries, believe it or not, long, narrow stretches of road, railroad tracks, and bodies of water. And I've been to several railroad tracks where there had been spook lights seen. I've been down to Gurdon, Arkansas. There's a spook light in Gurdon, Arkansas that I did not see, but yet I photographed. I was out there with the Arkansas Gazette newspaper. This is back about 1984, and they went out there with me. So I felt safe. I wasn't going out in the middle of the woods by myself, and I was going down this railroad track. And they said at the third trestle is where you stop, and that's your observation point. And it happens to be on the left-hand side. There's an old black, I think it's a black slave cemetery that's over there. So it's kind of spooky to begin with. And I'm looking down these train tracks, and I'm not seeing anything but pitch darkness, literally pitch darkness. So I set up a camera on a tripod, and I had very high-speed film, either 400 or 1,000 speed film or something. And I'm just kind of, again, I'm using a shutter release, so I'm not moving the camera. I'm just snapping it, and I'm holding it open, and I'm counting like to 10 seconds or something, and I'm doing one for like 15 seconds, I do it for 20 seconds. And again, I didn't see anything. I know we were looking down that direction because obviously that's where the light was coming from. We were talking, and they were talking because they wanted to do a little story on me too, which is fine, but I didn't come out there for the story. I came out there to look at the lights, but they wanted to do a little story on me. And I know we're all looking down there, and we didn't see anything. But yet, when I looked at the developed film, there are two pictures out of that roll that show anomalous lights on the train tracks. In fact, you can actually see the train track on one side partially illuminated by this anomalous light out there. It was so bright. And again, we didn't see that, but it was so bright that it actually illuminated one side of the train track.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool. And like I said, I mean, I've been to so many, and I'm finding I could write a volume 2, literally, on spook lights, because there are so many I have discovered since that time. I did not have the Cloverdale, Alabama spook light in that book because I was something that I had met Wyatt Cox years later, and he wrote the entire book on that. But there are other spook lights. There's one in Silver Cliff, Colorado, in a cemetery that was actually written about in the National Geographic magazine, which I have a copy of. They actually went out there to look at these lights, and they saw these bluish lights kind of bobbing around the cemetery. And there's nothing out there that would account for that. There's no cities nearby. I mean, way far away, but just there's nothing like you're going to see a reflection. A lot of times when you have what it calls spook lights inside cemeteries, what happens is that people will drive past, their headlights might reflect off a shiny tombstone, and then you get a spook light. So this is when people are just standing there without going past, you're seeing these spook lights out there, and apparently they're still out there. People have seen those fairly recently, and there's a few in California. There's one's called the Oriflame spook light that is out there in the desert. I actually had a chance to investigate the Hebron light in Maryland, and again, we didn't see anything. Of course, that had been apparently seen back in the mid-1960s, I believe. Now, sometimes spook lights can last for a very long time. The Joplin spook light has been seen since 1881. And even the earth lights that are seen out in Marfa from the 1870s. And these are long before there were cars on the road. So how do you explain that?
Yeah, I heard that the Brown Mountain Lights were seen. This legends about them from Native Americans from centuries ago. By the way, I've talked. I did an interview with Peter Jordan over in New Jersey. He investigated back in the 70s with a group called Vestigia, the Long Valley, right? And he said they were along a railroad track, and then later, when the railroad tracks were removed, there was no more light.
That happened over there at the Joe Baldwin's light in North Carolina, near the Mako train station. When we finally got out there to investigate the lights, there were no train tracks anymore. But we were actually able to find a few vintage railroad spikes from that time period that were just laying there. They're all rusty, so I kind of took one home for a souvenir. But if you remember, I believe it was Grover Cleveland, the president actually was riding in the caboose as they went through the train station, and he kind of looked out the window and he saw this light on the train tracks, and he asked the conductor, he goes, "What is that?" He goes, "Oh, don't worry, Mr. President, that's just Joe Baldwin's light." I mean, the story that the train had become detached, and he went out there to try to signal with his lantern to keep the other train from piling in, but he was unsuccessful, and there was a big collision. And apparently, supposedly in the story, he lost his head. He was decapitated. And now people say that the light that's seen in the train tracks is Joe Baldwin's ghost looking for his head with his lantern, which, if you think about it, I mean, how can you look for your head when you don't have a head? I mean, it's a lot of urban legend, Yeah,
there's a lot of those, connected with a lot of these sites, it seems. I know that I always found fascinating among the Cloverdale area lights stories was the one of Wyatt Cox and his partner, friend that investigated with him going back to the 70s, Greg Keaton, the light. And the one time they put all their equipment out, put all their equipment away, they were done for the night, and all of a sudden they see one of these lights, and it's over a train track. And he said that as a train come along, it was like it magnetically locked on to the train below it, and it just kind of started going along with the train itself. Unfortunately, they had their equipment put up at that point, which is the way it seems to work sometimes. Anyway, fascinating stuff.
Well, there's one in New Jersey that's called the Hookerman lights, which also appears on a set of train tracks. I believe my cover for the Illuminating the Darkness is actually a picture of the Hookerman train tracks, and then of course we inserted a spook light in there. It wasn't there when they I've never visited there, but I did get a picture of it, and we kind of inserted it with our graphic engineer to make it look like a spook light in the train tracks. But I mean, so many have been seen along train tracks. There's one actually, another one in my neck of the woods up in Barrington, Illinois, on the northwest side. And what happens is they'll pull up to this train crossing, and they kind of look down and they see a light on the train tracks, and they're wondering why the crossing guards aren't coming down to keep people from crossing. They don't hear any sound either. So as they wait and they wait and they wait, and they finally get out of the car, and they look down the train tracks, and it's not there anymore. And that's happened so many times. Sometimes they're very, very short-lived, and in some cases, like the Joplin light, they're out pretty much almost all night. And those are the ones that you can really do a lot of scientific study on. In fact, again, there was a group of engineers and a Japanese research firm that came out to investigate the Marfa lights. And I believe they were part of, again, it could have been a National Geographic or some very well-known public organization that was out there with them. And they were out there, and they had very, very expensive high-tech gear out there. And they were, shooting across the what's called the Mitchell Flats towards the El Chiante mountain range, where you can see, and it's the distance of several miles, but you can see flickers of light on the mountains, which most likely are cars going past in that thing on the roadway. And I always wanted to see if there was a way that to scientifically investigate these lights, if somehow they could close the road for at least an hour or an hour and a half and just divert cars, to other alternate routes. And that way you wouldn't have any lights on there. So any lights that you would see were not explainable. I mean, they were not car tail lights, headlights, spotlights, or anything like that. Now, most of the sightings don't happen higher up. They happen at ground level, where again, people will see these lights maybe a few feet off the ground, and it almost looks like they're about the size of a basketball or a volleyball. They kind of roll along the ground, very similar to the Joplin light. Sometimes they emit particles from the light itself, which I always thought was fascinating. So what are we dealing with here? Are we dealing with some sort of plasma ball? We're dealing with there was one guy, one gentleman years ago, decades ago actually, his name was Keith Partine. And he wrote a book which I never was able to find. I've been looking for it even on Amazon. And he had an explanation for the Joplin lights. He said that they were definitively ball lightning. And I don't know if you're an electrical engineer or a scientist, but ball lightning is extremely rare. You can get lightning, sure, but when you have like a plasma ball that literally kind of rolls and it just kind of pops. Now, scientists have actually been able to generate through experiments, and I actually have a video that actually shows their experiment of generating ball lightning. And they're very short-lived. I mean, 3 or 4 seconds and they pop, and that's it. And there's actually a pop you can actually hear. It's kind of a crackle. It's the same thing like when lightning goes through and you hear the thunder. It's a smaller boom. It's more like a pop. So to say, and I disagreed, to say that the lights that people see every single night from dusk till dawn are ball lightning, it's not feasible.
Yeah, I've always wanted to see ball lightning. Never did. But when I was in the Navy, I was on the forward lookout, located up above the bridge. It was all windy, and all of a sudden I heard this staticky sound, and this metal pole in front of me had a little flame coming out of it. And so I thought that was intriguing. It was making kind of a static type sound. So I held my hand out to the wind, fingers apart, and I had these little flames coming off my fingertips. And after a while, it started raining. And when it did, this thing, which I knew was St. Elmo's fire, had, because I'd heard about it before. And afterwards, my shift was over. I went and joined some of the crew members down. It was at night, and they would all gather down in the mess decks to have crackers and a drink or whatever. And I told them what I saw, and they says, "Oh, Brent, that's insane. You're making that up." And I said, "No, this is a known phenomenon. I know I've talked about UFOs, but St. Elmo's fire, that's one the scientists will tell you that's for real."
Yeah. There was a gentleman. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. His name was William Corliss, and William Corliss had wrote several books on anomalous fires and so forth. And he has so many different explanations.
Yeah, here's a book right here. In fact, it's got one fingertips with light coming from them.
And I think what I have is I actually have the paper bound editions, but they're thick. I mean, there's like 4 or 5 different things about anomalous lights and so forth. And even Vincent Gaddis wrote a book called Mysterious Lights and Fires, which I have a copy of. And Paul Devereaux wrote a book called Earth Lights, which I have a copy of. So I've actually studied a lot of different authors and how they have dealt with and what they have seen overseas. There's a very famous bunch of lights that are seen in Norway. I don't remember how you pronounce that word. It's something with an H.
Histelen or Histelen.
Yeah, right. And they're actually been seen out there to the point where that the science class from every year would go out and study these lights with their professor, and they would be very regular. So to me, that's what you would call an earth light. Most likely, it would be a naturally occurring type phenomena that they may or may not be able to explain thoroughly. But it's these other lights like Marfa lights, the Brown Mountain lights, the Joplin spook light, and a few others that really you can't categorize them as being natural or supernatural. They're just something in between. It's just some, you might call them just paranormal. We don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I know I read an article by Nick Redfern on the Big Thicket, I think in East Texas, and
Yeah.
he's talking about a spook light along a road, and he's talking about all these weird apparitional things, a lot of paranormal activity, all in the same general area that this spook light was appearing in. In fact, it was a forestry worker who said she came upon a along a pond. There was like this, as I recall, it was like a black panther. And then suddenly it started melting and it became just this little ball of light, and then it was gone. And I thought, wow, no, that's definitely a high paranormal right there.
Yeah.
And of course, my friend Greg Little and Andrew Collins wrote Light Quest a few years back, dealing, with the idea of plasma intelligence and such. I know Vincent Gaddis he was kind of interested in how some of the ball lightning seemed to have acted from the witness descriptions like they were almost guided by what they felt like an intelligence. So, who knows with some of the stuff. Then we had the Foe Fighters back during World War II.
Yeah.
What was that,
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to figure out if it's going to be this year or next year. It may be next year, because I'm going to be going to England and Scotland by the end of this month. By the end of May, the whole last week of May and the first 2 weeks of June, I'm going to be in England and Scotland. And I'm going to be looking into a couple of spook lights out there, including the very famous Renlisher Forest UFO investigation at that Air Force base, where there was actually a colonel from the base went out there with air police, and he was actually dictating into a cassette tape recorder what he was seeing, which you can actually find that online. And I do have a copy of it. It's kind of crackly, but he actually was seeing a light in the trees and everything. And these are trained observers. These are Air Force people. They got to have good eyesight and everything too, because a lot of them were pilots and everything. And they're saying, I can see that. We're going to try to get a little closer. And people are trying to say, well, they were just seeing the light on some radio tower. No, come on now. I mean, these are trained observers. We're gonna go out there. I guess that base has been decommissioned, I believe. So we're not going to be on the base, but we're going to be in the forest where this took place. And I got the tape recorder, the taped segment that he did, and we're going to see if we can kind of retrace some of that. But there's a spook light that I've been looking to investigate for years now. It's in Georgia. It's called the Screven Ghost Light in the town of Screven. I don't know much about it except that there is a light that people have seen out there. And so I figured, 1 year I'm going to try to get down to South Carolina and Georgia. And I know Wyatt wants to kind of tag along because he lives in South Carolina. And I said, you're more than welcome, my friend. So we're going to kind of look at the old Charleston jail out there, which is supposed to be haunted. And then the fort, I can't think of where the Civil War started. It kind of escapes me right now. But the fort out there where they pummeled started the Civil War, and then going down into Atlanta, Savannah, Andersonville Prison, and then the Screven Ghost Light. We're going to try to catch all those things. Where St. Bonaventure Cemetery, very, very haunted. And, there have been strange lights that have been seen in that cemetery as well. So a lot of times you have kind of a mixture of spook lights and haunted sites, and they may go hand in hand, because in some cases, if they're in cemeteries, maybe what we're seeing are the luminous forms of spirits that are hanging around. When they're elsewhere, in the case of, say, Joe Baldwin, maybe that's his spirit still on the train track, still trying to wave the train away with his lantern. There are so many stories like that, but there are some that don't really have any historical fact that would kind of back up why these lights are being seen. They're just there. People can't explain them. They're out there all night, college kids, high school kids, professors, and they can't explain them. I mean, if you look at the history of the Joplin light, of all the people that have been out there, University of Michigan was out there. There's been the National Bureau of Standards, the Army Corps of Engineers. In fact, I know for a fact that the Army Corps of Engineers actually went out there and investigated and did tests, and they were on the wrong road. That's why they never saw any lights. And Captain Robert Lofton, who was out there from Camp Crowder, which was part of the Army Corps of Engineers at the time, he wrote a very small little pamphlet book called Ghost Lights, which I have a copy of. I think it was like 15 cents back then. And I got it in my collection. So then I wrote many years later to the Army Corps of Engineers in Camp Crowder. And I said, I'm wanting to inquire who or what, how you investigated this light out there in Joplin, Missouri, near Joplin, Missouri. And I got a very nice letter back, the Air Force letterhead or Army letterhead, which said basically, we never have been out there to investigate the light. I mean, that's basically what they're saying. They never were there. And I know they're wrong. They're hiding something, I swear, because of all the lights that I've been to, the Joplin is the most mysterious. And I mean, there were students out there that claimed to have shot at this light with a high-powered rifle. Not the smartest thing to do. It could have been a car coming down the road or something.
Yeah.
And instead, it just temporarily winked out and came back. They said they've actually followed this with helicopters, and it disappeared. It appeared on the rear window of a school bus full of children coming back late, and they got completely terrified. Guy was coming down the hill and suddenly appeared on the hood of his car and stayed on the hood of his car for about 600 feet. I mean, there are just so many weird occurrences there. Even the early pioneers, they said that they would that this light would appear in the cabin windows at night. So this was seen long before there were cars out there. Right. And if there is some sort of weird thing going out there, or maybe, who knows, there might be some military experiments taking place out there, because you know how secret the military is, especially when the Roswell thing and all that, they still kind of covered all that up. Maybe they were doing something out there and just seeing how the public would react to it. I mean, I don't know. So maybe that's why I got that kind of brush off letter by the Army Corps of Engineers saying that we never were out there to investigate the spook light. I still have that in my files, so anybody ever wanted to see it. It's just interesting how I know for a fact they were out there, but they said they weren't.
Well, we hadn't even got into really the other area, the parapsychological or the the ghost hunting part of all this. Yeah, we, I know you sent me some EVPs. I hadn't listened to the photographs. Quite impressive. I know there was one of a woman sitting in a cemetery on a stone, a flat stone there, and it looked like, it was. She looked perfectly ordinary, but I guess she wasn't really there.
Right.
This was one of your people that took the picture. Or was this
Yeah,
you?
I mean, this was back in 1991, so this is before the digital technology. We were still using film cameras at that time, and a lot of times I would shoot black and white, high-speed infrared film. Now, infrared film is really sensitive to an area of light that we're not capable of seeing, the infrared spectrum, somewhere between 600 and 900 nanometers. And a nanometer is 1/1000th of a meter. So you can see how tiny that little spectrum of light of infrared actually is. And the sensitivity of the film only pick up a small portion of that. So I had told Judy Huff, who was out there taking the pictures, and she wanted to know how to do that properly. And I wrote a book on spirit photography. I said, well, pick up a copy of my book, number one, but then I will walk you through this. What you have to do. That film must be refrigerated before use. If they take it off the back shelf and give it to you, don't buy it because it's already been fogged. because it's sensitive to heat. That's why they keep it refrigerated. You got to take it out an hour before and let it warm up to room temperature. Otherwise, it fogs the film. You got to make sure you load it and unload it in total darkness, not subdued light. That's why even when they develop it, they can't have a red light in the developing room. They have to do this in total darkness.
Wow.
Using an E6 process, I believe. And so she had a camera. It was a point and shoot, and we were going through the cemetery. We would give everybody a map to tell them to go through with the equipment in teams of 2. Tell me what you feel, what you pick up, what you sense. And several people stopped at that checkerboard tombstone, which had no name on it. It was part of a base, which there would have been something on top of it. It's been long gone. So we went back there, and she snapped pictures from a couple of different angles. And initially, when she looked at the film, she said, I didn't see anything, because what you're seeing is an extreme blow up of that area. The initial picture, there was a little tiny figure of a person sitting on the tombstone way on the left-hand side. That was not the focus of her picture. The focus was in the center. So she didn't initially capture it with her eyes until next time she picked up. She goes, whoa, what is that? Now, this is the summertime. We were all in shorts, jeans, tank tops, t-shirts. It was August. It was hot. Nobody was dressed in a full-length gown like that woman is dressed in, and there was nobody there at the time sitting on that tombstone. So when that picture was taken, again, because it was infrared film, I think it was captured, and that picture ended up being on the Chicago Tribune, Chicago Sun-Times, my Windy City Ghost book, one of Spirit Photography. I actually was on television several times for that, including a Discovery Channel presentation called Spirit Photography, or I believe it was called Spirit Photography. And the interesting part is that even Ghost Adventures put, when they visited Bachelor's Grove, they used that photograph, and then Judy Huff was actually on a show called Aftershocks when she went to talk more about it. It's one of the most interesting examples of spirit photography I've ever seen. I was there, so I know it wasn't faked. I would never fake a photograph and jeopardize my credibility for one picture. Nobody was dressed like that. There was nobody on that tombstone. And it looks like a woman in a Victorian gown, kind of in profile. And if people look very closely, part of her head and part of her one knee is actually semi-transparent. You can see through them. I mean, she's not all there. Now, that was actually given to a guy in Kodak in Rochester, New York, on that show, Phantom Photographs, for Discovery Channel. And this guy was supposedly a photographic expert. And he says, well, I've been told that this is infrared film and that there's a person sitting on here. It's my opinion that most likely it's a real person because she's casting a shadow on the ground. But what that guy didn't actually look, he jumped to the conclusion that tombstone and the woman are already in the shade. So she could not have been casting a shadow. He didn't see that. You look at the photo very carefully. That whole image of the girl in the tombstone are in the shade. She's not in the sunlight. Yeah. So obviously, if she were in the sunlight, was casting a shadow, then it could have been a real person. But we didn't see anybody dressed like that.
Very impressive. Then it was another one I saw with 2 guys working on a roof, and behind them there's a building with a window, and you see this elderly woman, full figure, standing there in the window looking out at them. I guess she's looking at him, looking outward anyway. And I would think this was just that she was just there. It was ordinary. It's in daylight. But apparently she wasn't really there. Can you tell us a little about that? Was that I know I'll use the pictures, your bio, and I'll include the pictures in with the article, but I thought we might discuss them beforehand.
Sure. That picture was actually taken of a house that was being renovated. The woman that had owned the house, she was the last survivor member of that house. And when she died, apparently it was handed down to her children, and the children just decided to sell the house. So what they were doing is they were going in and they were, putting on a new roof. They were doing stuff inside. They were painting, getting it nice for the next owner in case they wanted to sell the house. And the one gentleman that's standing up, kind of looking at the camera, is a gentleman that I know, and I know him to be a very reliable, very trustworthy individual. And the guy that took the picture is a friend of his, of the guy that's standing up, obviously. And they were just kind of documenting what they were doing. They were working out there. Hey, I'm working on the roof and blah, blah, blah. They snap a picture. And that's how a lot of spirit photographs are often taken. You don't see it when you take the photograph necessarily, but then when you look at the photograph, it is captured. And the reason being is that our eyes are like motion picture cameras. We take in motion. But a camera freezes a moment of time and space just like that, in a fraction of a second, sometimes faster than the eye can blink. I have Canon AE1s, 35 millimeter cameras that can snap images at 1,000th of a second. That's a second. 1,000 times faster than that snap of a finger is how that shutter is open and closed. And that short space of time, we can capture things that necessarily we don't see at the time. That's why you have the old adage, well, I didn't see it, but the camera caught it. Well, exactly right, because the camera can snap something faster than we can blink our own eyes. And in that window is apparently the old woman looking out of her bedroom window at somebody working on her house. And she was long dead. She had been dead for, I don't know, a few days, a week, something like that. She had been long put in the ground and everything. They had a funeral and they had the burial. And yet she's kind of like checking these guys out to make sure that you're doing a good job out there. And it was an amazing picture because if you zoom in on it, I mean, it's not something called pareidolia. It's not matrixing. It's not what they call simulacra. It's not some sort of eye-brain thing saying our brain's trying to make something out of it, which is what pareidolia actually is. It's a real, very solid-looking personage of a woman.
Amazing.
It's one of my better. It's not my capture, but it's one of the better photographs that I've gotten. Besides the two faces in the doorway, and those are the two of the best ones that I've ever been given by people that just took ordinary photographs of people either working on something or standing in front of, or maybe going to a party or going to fishing or on vacation, and then something shows up, and that's how most spirit photographs happen.
Right, and then you just mentioned the picture of two figures in the door looking at, right? That's the one with the mother and the small child, and it's just they're the steps going up to the door. It's daytime outside, and was that something that your team was just snapped? Or that was just something that someone in the family snapped a picture of?
Yeah, this was a total stranger that were out there. They had just moved into a new house in Chicago on the south side. It was their first house. The husband was taking a picture of his wife and their child in front of their not a brand new house, but the house they moved into. Right. And they were very excited about it. And he was using a 35 millimeter camera in broad daylight. And that just goes to show that ghosts can show up in the middle of the day. They don't have to be out in spooky cemeteries in the middle of the night. They show up anytime. And when they snapped the picture, I mean, obviously they didn't see anything behind the woman. There was nobody in the house. The house was empty. And when they snapped the picture, they got the film back, and the woman goes, "Who was in my house?" They later found out about me through my website, and they called me, and the woman was so insistent that she bring the photograph to me in person. She didn't want to take a chance of having anything happen in the mail that got lost. But she had the negative, but she still wanted to show it to me in person. I said, "Well, come on over." And I met the person. This is a very nice lady came over there and showed this to me. And I go, "Whoa." I mean, what I see is on the right, an elderly lady with her hair kind of pulled up in a bun, and to the left of her, or to the right of her, and to the left of the picture, looks like a dog, like a bulldog. You can see like a black snout. And they didn't have any animals in the house at the time. In fact, they didn't even own any animals. The lady later told me that when she showed it to friends and relatives in her family, they told her that it looked very much like her aunt that had died before she was born.
Oh,
so
wow.
Maybe this was the aunt coming back to just say hi. And they never had any problems. They never had any paranormal activity. It was just like, hey, I'm going to show up to show you, that, this is who I am, and, like a farewell or a goodbye, and that was it. Now, we have no idea who the dog is unless it was related to the woman. Now, some people have actually tried to say that is actually caused by the reflection of the window. These are individual, what they call jealousy panes, that when you crank them individually, they open up like this. They're like individual panes of windows. And for them to, for those faces to be perfectly created on reflections of panes of windows, I don't agree with. Now, you will see below both of their necks, you can see the reflection of the window, of the pane, but even there you can see through the reflection that the person's, it's a solid thing. I mean, it's fairly solid. Something that, again, just using 35 millimeter, they weren't using any infrared or anything like that, but they just took an ordinary photograph of an ordinary thing, and they got something extraordinary.
Yeah. Now, I hadn't asked you, but so a lot of times this brings out interesting things. How was it that you became so passionately involved in these very unusual kind of experiences that people have?
Well, I can kind of blame my parents for that, because my parents and my grandparents as a youngster told me ghost stories. And that's the absolute truth. I mean, at a very young age, 6 or 7 years old, they were telling me ghost stories. And there was a very famous ghost story in Chicago, which is still very famous, called Resurrection Mary. It's a hitchhiking ghost that's been seen since the latter 1930s. Now, my dad, kind of being the ghost hunter of the family, so to speak, my mom didn't really care for that kind of stuff. My dad used to take my mom out to a date, to a movie, to a show, to a theater, or to a bar, or dancing, or whatever. But on the way home, it was my dad's thing to drive past the cemetery, around and around the cemetery all night, looking for the ghost. My mom was absolutely terrified. And she was the one that told me that this is what your dad did. Your dad used to drive you past the cemetery in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning. I didn't want to see the ghost. I wanted to go home. But he wanted to see the ghost for himself. So when I was told this, that was actually my very first ghost story I was ever told, was Resurrection Mary. Now, my parents, my grandparents also, grandparents came from Poland. So I'm 96% Polish. I did an ancestry DNA test, so I know that for a fact. And my grandparents actually told me Polish ghost stories as well. So I was introduced at a very young age. Sometimes I'd get nightmares, sure, but the very next day, tell me another ghost story. I was kind of like that. I really wanted to hear. So when I got older, I had been told so many stories, which I remember very, very vividly, including Resurrection Mary, that I wanted to kind of check into these stories to see if they were really true, to see if they were factual, to see if they were maybe urban legends or old wives' tales or folklore or something like that. And that's what got me kind of in the trail I am today, kind of tracking down ghost stories, trying to figure out what's real, what's not real. I'm not a skeptic, but I'm skeptical sometimes of stories. So I mean, I can't take everything everybody tells me as factual, but I take it with a grain of salt. I mean, I always figure that if people are calling me in to do an investigation because they're seeing something, what purpose would it be to lie to me, to say that something's happening where there really isn't something happening? So that's kind of how I got started, and started, small little P.O. box here in Oak Lawn. Used to get on long before they had the World Wide Web. I used to get on what they used to call BBSs, bulletin board services. I'm sure you probably remember them, like modified chat rooms to what you'd have today. And people would send me their pictures, their stories, and what we today call snail mail instead of email. And that's how I got started. And of course, with the digital technology and the advent of the internet and the World Wide Web, is so easy to contact people. In fact, just last night I got an email from somebody who wants to know if I make house calls because they got things going on in their house. I have to figure out where they are and find out more information. We might have a new case coming up here. But in my almost 50 years, because I started way back in 1975, I've investigated almost 4,000 cases, all across the country, all across the world. I'll be going to England and Scotland. This will be my third trip to the UK, and I did some investigating out there. So we got some investigations we got already set up for 2023 when we go out to the United Kingdom.
Well, sounds like we need to do a follow-up interview after that. I think there'll be some stories.
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to be back on.
Wow, 4,000. Wow, that's a lot. Well, I kept you here for, I think, almost an hour and a half. I guess I
don't mind talking.
Well, you've wow, this fascinating stuff, and I've got something I think might interest you. I'm going to send you a link to. Oh yeah, and I know you're into EVPs and you listen to the audio there. Myself and others got using a ghost box. I didn't know.
That was fascinating with the John Keel coming through. That was very fascinating.
Yeah, there was one with John Keel, Brent, and then followed by another voice saying Bert here, and Bert was actually Berthold Schwartz, but we would call him Bert. I mean, that's what I associate with, because he passed away in September of 2010, and I was getting Keel earlier that year, and Keel passed away in July 3rd of 2009, and the night we did that, had a gathering at Sandy Nichols and Thompson Station near Nashville, south of Nashville. It was a year from the death of John Keel, and we'd gotten John Keel a number of times. So I just said, hey, can we go ahead and try this? So I think we had 3 recorders going. We had a ghost box hooked up to 2 big old stereo speakers. So we had to yell in order to be heard ourselves, and there was just so much going on. I was skeptical, in the beginning, because I had, tried for some EVPs years earlier, and I had a couple of them I kind of questioned, but for the most part, I was the one who was debunking. I can explain that. That's someone that was talking in the other room, but these were, they were so intelligent, interactive, and there were times when it was just right afterwards, just a second or two after the request of is John Keel there, and then a voice says John Keel, and it was very, I guess you say, synchronistic or whatever. But I've had times when I would ask. I mean, it's rare you get more than just a few words, but there's times occasionally where I get a whole sentence, and we were hearing a voice, and I thought it was Enoch, and someone else thought it was something with an I, and I thought it was Enoch with an O, like from the Bible and such. And so I'm there. I'm saying, is it Enoch or Enoch, and is it with an I or an O? And I did this for several minutes. Finally, a voice comes back at me in real time. I hear it. It's recorded, and it says Enoch with an O.
Cool.
And
cool.
I think I said something like "Holy,"
Yeah.
I tried to edit that out, and I thought, I should have kept that in there, because that's an honest human reaction to something like that, But,
well, that's similar to some of the stuff that I sent you. I mean, we were getting full sentences coming through using First of all, a device that I call Phasmabox, which is basically an app that you can actually get. And I'm not really big in apps, but I have worked with this for a number of years now, and literally when we asked the questions, we would get like a full answer in response, a whole series of words, which is pretty amazing, considering that this device this app actually only runs on scanning and sweeping AM/FM frequencies and using in sound banks with a reverb and echo effect, but it does it so very fast. You're lucky to get a word through in some cases, like going back to, we use an SB7, but we also use this device, which is called an SB11. The SB11 actually is a modified version of the SB7, the ghost box. It has 2 channels on here that you can scan AM, FM, FM, AM, AM, FM, and all different varieties in fast and slow. And it also has a device here on the side, which lets you disconnect from the antenna. So in theory, you're not picking up any radio bleed through at all, unless you're close to a station that has 50,000 watts, in which case you might get something. But I mean, the Phasmabox, when we started getting responses, direct responses to questions we had asked in full sentences, it knocks my socks off. It really does. Yeah. And the same thing with the Ovilus that we use. The Ovilus, this is the Ovilus 5, but we were using the Ovilus X in the one that I sent you, where it says "Get out of here," and that literally was in what we call phonetic mode. Now, these devices actually have several different modes. In the dictionary mode, it basically uses what's in the dictionary, only the words in the dictionary, and only says one word at a time, which is cool. But sometimes you can say, what's your favorite color? And they might say color, or something, which is, of the 4,000 words in there, to get a word to come out to a response you have is pretty far-fetched if you can get that. Mm-hmm, yeah. But the phonetic mode is even more amazing, because the phonetic mode does not use the dictionary. It uses what's called phonomes. In other words, it allows the spirits to put vowels and consonants into words and then make the words into sentences. So they create the stuff themselves using a speech synthesizer in the Ovilus. And for that whole thing to say, "Get out of here," I mean, that's pretty amazing. It's not like "Get out of here," "Get out of here," just like we're talking. And so many other things have come through in full sentences, which is really amazing. And then we have some that we picked up initially with the SB7, which is, I think, what you might have had, the SB7, maybe the ghost box.
What I was using was, and I think the other 2 that I was working with primarily it's just a Radio Shack AM/FM digital radio, and it's modified where you can put it on continuous scan, and we just always seemed like for ourselves that AM frequency was the best one to use. And what was interesting is, Brett Oldham, who introduced me to it, he always used as like a spirit tech, asking him to reach out to certain people and bring him in so we could talk with him, was named Bishop. And ever since then, when I ask who's there, I'll get Bishop, and it's, we have like, I know, like in the area we have like maybe Bishop Motors or something. But it's always just Bishop, it's always you always hear him at the beginning when you ask who's there, along with someone named Philip, and then then throughout the session you'll hear him off and on too. Those 2 names, and I don't know, it surprised Brett because he didn't expect that I was going to inherit his spirit guide. Anyway,
we used to have a tech guy. Unfortunately, he died several years ago, and he was very, very smart, Stan Suho. And he actually devised a lot of the equipment that we use today, including a Geiger counter, a negative ion detector, and a whole bunch of other things that he actually built from Radio Shack parts using schematics from Popular Electronics magazines. Mm-hmm. And he actually put together what's called a Radio Shack hack, they used to call it, which is what you probably use, just using a regular AM and being able to just scan continuously.
Right.
But he devised a lot of our equipment for us. And, I mean, in some cases, we started out with the Hack Shack, and then, of course, when the SB7 came out, we got that. But that you have to use with an external speaker because it doesn't produce enough sound that you can actually hear. This thing, if I was to turn it on here, just to give you an example, just how loud this thing is. Here we got the.
Very loud. Very loud. You don't need to hook that up to the stereo.
Very
speakers.
loud. And again, that's just static, but I mean, it can scan so many different ways. This actually has a device in here which has a temperature gauge. So if on the bottom here, if there's if this gets too cold, it'll go into the blue. If it picks up temperature, it'll go into the hot. But I don't like using that because the deviation is so minute. If it just goes up a couple of tenths of a degree, it's alerting right away. And I said, well, I don't want that. I would like to alert if it went up 5 or 6 degrees or got 5 or 6 degrees colder. And that would be something which would be easy to do. That's why I prefer something like the Mel meter, which has a continuous temperature on here. And this is the little temperature gauge right on top here. But there are even more sensitive things that we use called digital parameters, which are intensely insane picking up temperatures. I mean, you can put this device, it's like a wand. You can put this wand into a freezer and it'll show right away, immediately, temperature of the freezer. You pull it out, goes back to room temperature just that quickly. So like if you're walking through it and you suddenly run into a cold spot, this thing would instantaneously give you a reading of what that temperature is. And as you went through the cold spot back into a warm spot, it goes back to 72 degrees or whatever the temperature is. We use those a lot too, which is they actually have 3 different wands. There's one for air temperature. There's one for immersion into like liquids. And there's the third one, which is a contact thing. So you would like contact whatever, a window, a door, a wall, a floor, whatever, and it will give you a contact reading. Those are very good. They're hard to come by. They're called digital parameters. We got them on, I believe, on eBay. We picked up several of them. A couple of people from my group got them as well. And they're very good for picking up cold spots. And then we also use this one too. I did another show and tell here, which is a REM pod. You probably see those, a telescopic probe. The same type of thing. Basically, if something gets too close to the device, it's going to start to go off right away. And we use that. That thing is went off on command in some cases. We'll say, if you're near it, touch it, and the thing goes off. Now, I will tell you a little secret if you don't already know. These television shows that you see on TV, how they get those devices like the REM pod, the Mel meter, and other things to go off. It's an interesting little secret. All you got to do is key in a walkie-talkie. Be in another room and key a walkie-talkie in, and you're going to get that signal to go off. That's how they're able to get it on command. That's why those shows are a bunch of poohooey, in my opinion. They're reality TV shows. They're not good for teaching people the proper ways of doing things. I always tell people, if you want to know the proper way, join an experienced group and go out there and learn from them. Don't learn from TV shows. They could then teach you the wrong way.
Yeah, I know. I was contacted by a young man him and his buddy formed a group, and they wanted to investigate a place I had already been to, and they wanted to see about the people just evacuating their home for that night so they could go in and just be the only ones. And I said, no, that's not the way we did it. They won't agree to that. You got to go in, and they'll be present and they'll be observing. And then he said, And we'd also, well, okay, I'll talk to him. He never did call him last time I heard. I don't think I think I discouraged him, but he said we'd also like it if you weren't there. We find it we find it works best for us, if it's just us. And I thought, okay, all right, well, good luck. you know.
Yeah. Well, I can't tell you how many TV shows and programs that I have turned down in my time. Um, I think I sent you an autobiography of myself, and it's very extensive of the things that I've been on. But I was contacted decades ago by Pilgrim Films, and they said they were putting together a brand new TV show for the at that time it was the Sci-Fi Channel, and it was going to be called Ghost Hunters. They wanted me to be the lead investigator. I still have the letter here, and that was even before they had contacted Jason and Grant to be on the show. A lot of people don't know this, and I don't like to brag. And it must have been something that they said to me while they were saying, "This is what we need you to do on the show," or something. And I don't quite remember, but somehow we just didn't jive. Okay. Because unfortunately, a lot of those shows, and I'm going to say it right outright, but I'm not going to say the name of the show because I get enough hate mail at the way it is. But a lot of those shows, they fake stuff on those TV shows if they don't get legitimate evidence. And I will never fake stuff for money or for being on TV. It's just not my way. If I can't get evidence, just like when I went down to Cloverdale, I could have said, "Oh yeah, I saw a ton of ghost lights and everything." No, I didn't. Unfortunately,
Well,
in other places,
yeah, I've had people. Well, there was a young man a few years back who met up at Sandy Nichols' home that I mentioned, where we did the the real successful EVP session with John Keel
Mhm.
in 2010, and he he said he went out and he bought him a ghost box, and he tried it out, and he wished he hadn't invested that money. He said he'd like to get his money back. It didn't work for him, and he tried it out 2 times, and and nothing happened for him. And I saw him criticizing somebody else who used the ghost box, so I jumped in, and I and it wasn't just him; it was some of his ghost hunting friends too,
Okay.
and they were just unloading on this one guy who was a ghost hunter, and he used the ghost box. And I thought, this is so ridiculous. Just because it doesn't work for you or didn't work for you, especially if you only tried it a couple times, um, you know, there and we were down in Alabama one time too, and went to this place that was supposed to be haunted, and I think it probably qualifies as haunted, but there was a local group that was there, and we were just new at capturing things ourselves on the ghost box. And um, my wife said something to one of the people on this ghost hunting team about what we'd picked up. Oh, we don't use that. That's just you'll just get pareidolia. That's
Audio pareidolia. Yeah, I've heard that.
yeah. That's all. That's just a waste of your time. And so anyway, she just walked away from that one. But anyway,
Well, I tell people that if you get into the field, first of all, you got to have perseverance. I mean, it took me seriously 12 years before I got anything that was worthwhile. And that's a long time, maybe. I mean, you talk about people that only use the ghost box twice and they're mad. Can you imagine me doing something for 10, 12 years and getting nothing? I'm trying to, well, maybe there's nothing out here at all. No, it's just that sometimes when you go to locations, the spirits don't talk to you. It's just plain and simple.
well,
Or
I mean,
they have
back in the
enough energy
70s.
to do something. And that's probably what it was. Or maybe they don't like the people asking the questions.
Maybe.
You know,
But I was in the 70s. Made a lot of attempts with a recorder, cassette at the time, to capture ghost voices. And I thought maybe a couple times might have, but most of the time, again and again, it was something explainable. And so I kind of gave up until 2010. With Brett Oldham, and by George, it worked. And in fact, the very first time we got together, I sat out of it. I didn't even bother. My daughter just had a little boy, so I stayed in another room and watched him, played with him. And then it was afterwards my daughter and my wife came out of the session and said, that was pretty interesting. You know, we actually heard some things that it sounded like more than just coincidence. So that piqued my curiosity, and I attended a session. And then, well, I didn't hear anything that first time, but I realized, you know, hey, you do have to persevere.
Yeah.
And yeah, it seems like whenever I go to look at a mystery light site or something, nothing happens. Down at Cloverdale, I've been, I guess, more than a dozen times. I've seen 2 lights that disappeared while we were watching. We hoped to get a picture of them. And I remember Wyatt was about to start photographing, and it looked like it was going to go right over our heads. And he was fixing to photograph it, and it just went out. And it was a clear night, and it looked like at first maybe it was going to be a plane. But then, you know, it's like, okay, if the light was turned out even at that, how come we didn't hear any engine? There was no sound whatsoever, you know. So yeah, but I the night that Wyatt and Dan Erickson saw the tubular looking thing with like little windows in it that appeared and then did a kind of a swinging back and forth motion and going lower and lower to the ground. And then Dan actually said he thought it was maybe an airliner going to crash, and he expected a huge explosion once it reached ground level, and it did, and no explosion, nothing. Yeah. And Wyatt said something like, well, anybody can see a UFO. I wanted us to see one of these spook lights. And I said, doggone, why did you say that? I said, I would have been excited just, you know, to be there and to actually see, you know, the fallen leaf.
I was excited to be there myself, even though I didn't see anything. I think it was a great time, even though I was scared to death that first night when that tornado came through there, hit Florence and that area around Cloverdale. And I tell you, we actually heard that tornado coming through. We actually heard it because something my friend was saying, "You hear that? Sounds like a freight train." I said, "Yeah, I hear it." And no place for us to go. I mean, we couldn't go anywhere. We had no basement. They said, please don't hail. I got a brand new car. I don't want my car damaged. It didn't hail. But, you know, besides that, I had a great time. You know, I mean, I remember when I came back home, Wyatt had sent me a picture the night that I left, the day that I left, that night, they had photographed the light out there. I don't know if you saw that or not, but they photographed the light in that field. And it looks like a fuzzy patch out there. It was the one guy that had a really nice camera out there, really nice digital camera. They must have saw it long enough where they could just snap a picture because they got the picture, and then it must have disappeared after that. And I go, you see, it always happens with just the day I leave, and things are going to start acting up again. But
well, I tell them when I'm going to leave before they do. I said, okay, now I'm going to leave, and now you'll probably see something. You know?
Yeah, that's how it is.
But anyway,
I mean, I just tell people, I say, you know, I mean, just when you start out in the field, you may not get something right away. We had this one guy in our group that was, he was kind of on the fence about this stuff. But we went to Poasttown Elementary School in Poasttown, Ohio, which is a very haunted building. And he had this eddy meter, which is a meter that picks up a lot of stuff, including temperature, humidity, motion, and a whole bunch of other different parameters. So he set this on a chair in front of a dowel in this room, and he put a camera on it, and he left. And he goes, Dale, that eddy meter was moving. I go, what? Show it to me. Well, in the original footage, and I got both, the original and the edited, the original footage, it took several minutes for this device to go from here to here, several minutes. So I said, I mean, no one's going to watch a video if I post it on my YouTube channel. It's going to watch for 7 minutes and see that thing move ever so slightly. So what I did is I took the whole footage, I condensed it, and I kind of jogged it back and forth. And you can see this device going like this.
Mm-hmm.
Something was moving that device. Nobody was in that room. There was a doll. The doll wasn't moving it. And that was his first piece of evidence. And boy, I tell you, he everywhere he went, he showed that piece of evidence. I caught that on my camera. I said, that's what you live for in the paranormal, those aha moments. And then when you get something like that, then it's really going to immerse you into the paranormal, because now you want something better.
Yeah, I mean, there was years I didn't have anything. I just always was interviewing other people about their experiences, but it changes you. It gets you all excited. For about 4 years, I did about 2 sessions a week of trying to get something. Another EVP. I became obsessed with it. But after a while, I thought I need to get back to the basic research.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, well, Dale, I'm gonna have to run along here now.
Okay.
But I've been thoroughly enjoyed talking with you, and I hope that we might do this again, and perhaps meet again out here in the field somewhere. Quite. Anyway, we've discussed all these different things, and you've shown us all the kind of equipment, photographing spook lights or capturing sounds and images of ghosts. So we're this is like a class too, educational thing for viewers, and the stories of things you've investigated, you and your group, and quite fascinating. So thank you very much. And
thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And I'll get this posted, if not tonight, tomorrow. And
Sounds good.
And so anyway, well, you take care, and we'll stay in touch. Appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.